في خطاب مهم عن مراجعة للدستور حتى يمكننا أن ننزل الجهوية، وهذا هو هذا المشروع المهم، الجهوية كواقع ديمقراطي معاش في المغرب. وطبعا في خطاب 9 مارس الذي تحدث فيه صاحب الجلالة عن الدستور الجديد هناك تشديد على هذه الجهوية. ماذا تعني الجهوية في كلمة واحدة؟ هو أن التنمية سوف يشرف عليها المواطن، إذا المواطن سوف يكون ضمن النخبة الجهوية التي سوف يكون لها القرار وسوف يكون له سلطة المراقبة. في الأخير ما هو الجديد في المغرب؟ هنا نحن الآن في خضم إصلاح دستوري، ولنا مؤسسات جديدة هي الآن بدأت تشتغل لكي تعطي لهذه التجربة المغربية، تعطيها مضمونا وتعطيها طموحا أكثر. هناك المجلس الوطني لحقوق الإنسان، ونعتبره كما يعتبره المجتمع الدولي، نعتبره إذن مؤسسة مستقلة تستوفي ما يسمى بشروط باريس، معايير باريس في اللجان الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان. هناك مؤسسات أتمم بهذا، مؤسسات لتعزيز الشفافية والمنافسة، مثل يعني قد أعود في الحديث عن سردها، ولكن في الأخير أود أن أنهي كما وعدتكم بنقطة مهمة جدا جاءت في تدخل السيد الرئيس حبيبي، وهو قضية التنوع. من رهاناتنا كلنا حاليا أن ننجح في هذه العملية، ولذلك المنهاج المغربي يمكن أن يلخص في نقطة، وهو أن من شرط الديمقراطية أن يتم التنوع داخل الوحدة، وأن تكون الوحدة راعية للتنوع. شكرا لكم.
شكرا لك سيدة لطيفة أخرباش. أستسمحكم فقط لأن السيدة الرئيسة باشلت ستغادرنا بعد ربع ساعة، فسأعدل قليلا، يعني أترك الدكتورة هبة بعد إذنك يعني نطرح بعض الأسئلة التي طرحت على السيدة باشلت، ثم نسمح لها بالمغادرة ونواصل، لأن لديها ارتباط ضروري وستغادرنا بعد ربع ساعة. الحقيقة الأسئلة سأحاول أن أجملها بشكل محاور، لأن ليس مطروحا أن نورد كل الأسئلة، رغم أن كلها الحقيقة مهمة وجيدة. أطرح نقاط بسرعة على السيدة الرئيسة باشلت. هناك تساؤلات عن الطريقة المثلى للتعامل مع المؤسسة العسكرية في مرحلة انتقالية من خلال تجربة تشيلي. هذا سؤال وتكرر في أكثر من مشارك. ثم أيضا هناك سؤال يتعلق بما الذي قمتم به لإعادة صياغة المؤسسة الأمنية البوليس بعد سنوات من إطلاق يد البوليس في تشيلي مع المؤسسة العسكرية. كيف قمتم بإصلاح المؤسسة الأمنية؟ تفضلي سيدتي. تقريبا هذه أبرز الأسئلة التي طرحت للسيدة الرئيسة، فنعطيها المجال حول هذين النقطتين.
Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry I have to leave. I have a meeting with some ministers, and but anyway, there are some Chileans here who will be part of the other workshop, so they can also answer some of the questions. But of course, as a former Minister of Defense, I had personally some experience, but of course, from the beginning of the democracy, this was a very important issue. First of all, because when we came into, and we win democracy, when we won the elections, the coalition who was fighting for democracy had in front of us armed forces that were still having the same commander-in-chief that during the military regime. Not only General Pinochet, but other forces were led by the same with the police forces. But on the other hand, We had very strong security forces that were really involved in the past on the violations of human rights, but also with some restrictions on our legal framework that would not lead us to do whatever we wanted in 5 minutes. So it was a process of a lot of political negotiation in terms of ensuring all the different systems, as I said, judiciary, to revisit the laws, to see how we could really increase awareness and knowledge of human rights, how we could deal with the past, but in a way not to put in danger the transition, but on the other hand to give real and clear signs that democracy was about building a country that would have to, in order to really be able to heal their wounds, it had to heal the wounds based on truth, justice, and reparation. I mentioned it was not an easy process, and with the security sector and with the police and armed sector, it was also an issue of different policies and different strategies and different activities, and it was step by step. But one of the main issues in terms of really making a difference was to, first of all, as soon as was possible, to be able to ensure that the President of the Republic was the Commander-in-Chief on the armed forces, and he had to be the Commander-in-Chief personally, but of course empowering its Minister of Defense, who was a civilian. It was very important in the Chilean experience that the Minister of Defense was a civilian, so he could really be, but a civilian that could really be sort of bridge between government and the armed forces and the police forces. During the military regime, they changed the dependence of some of the forces, because in the past, in our country, the police forces and the security forces were depending on the Minister of Interior. But because this was a coup d'etat made by the armed forces and the police forces, in terms of a political internal situation, they put everyone under the Ministry of Defense, so they could be in equal conditions. So we inherited that too, and until now, I mean, until I was Minister of Defense, because we changed that law during my presidency, the militaries were independent on and the police forces. But it was very important to work with them in terms of revising the curricula. The curricula was very important in our country because in Latin America, on those times, and many times that they were called law-intensive laws, there was sort of national security plans that thought that part of the population was the enemy, and it was treated as the enemy. So we need to change the military and defense strategy, the policies, the doctrines. We need to change that and to train the future generation of police forces, armed forces, with the new concept. And the new concept is that nobody can be over the rule of law. And I think that was one of the more essential things. And of course, for some time, probably there were people who did not believe in this, but everybody respected the laws. And at the meantime, we were training, and we were sending our people outside to learn other experiences, and we were developing, I would say, a new concept on defense and police and security issue, that security is not over people. What is the most important thing in a country? What is the most important, even on defense issues? It's the people. So no one can go over the people and try and think that the people can threat. In a way, you can go over the rule of law to explain that security can be over anything else. And it was not a 5-minute issue. It took time, but it was possible. And I would say before I was Minister of Defense, way before already, I mean, the democratic forces and the President of the Republic was in command of the military and arms. But it meant it took persistence, it took patience, it took sometimes to walk 2 steps but maybe get back 1 step. It was not easy. You need to pass a lot of laws to organize a situation. We need to think what we can do with the former security forces so they will always also accept the situation. So there was a lot to be done, but I would say it's very important to train and educate the young generation in this new way of doing things, because it will take time, but it will pay off.
شكرا. two more questions for you, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. في الخمس دقائق قبل أن تغادرنا السيدة باشلت، سؤالان تكرر في أكثر من ورقة. الأول يتعلق بمكانة المرأة التي جعلت سيدة تصل إلى رئاسة الدولة في تشيلي، وهناك سيدات أخريات في أمريكا اللاتينية. هل من تفسير لهذه الظاهرة؟ والنقطة الثانية والأخيرة، مثلما كان لديكم نوع من رحابة الصدر في تحمل مرحلة انتقالية مع المؤسسة العسكرية ومع بينوشيت تحديدا، هل كان لكم نفس سعة الصدر في التعاطي مع ما يسمى بالثورة المضادة في تشيلي؟
Well, the first thing that I have to say is that now I'm Executive Director of UN Women. So I'm working for gender equality and women's empowerment in the world from the United Nations. And I am so convinced, and the State Secretary of Morocco mentioned it, I'm so convinced that if a society wants to not only be a real democratic one, and democracy, all of us spoke about pluralism, about participation, about inclusiveness, but so to include women, women's rights, women's consideration in new strategies, in new policies, in new constitution is a must. But it's not only the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Because when you see all the international figures on the contribution that women can give to the countries, in terms, for example, on those post-conflict countries, in terms of peacemakers, peace builders, how women have been part of a process. So why should somebody be part of a process, but when the process has sort of consolidated or has emerged, taken out of that process? It's very interesting because it's an old question. Eleanor Roosevelt, when it was the Declaration of Human Rights in the 1946, she called upon giving women the same place that they had in war, in peace, and when reconstructing societies. So from the peace aspect and stability aspect, women can play a very substantive role. Second, we have all spoken how important it is to build a democratic country, but on the other hand, to have economic recovery and prosperity for all. In our case, in our coalition, our motto was always growth with equity, or we could say growth with social justice, using the social protection, equality. We always understood there was not a need to make a trade-off between economic growth and social justice. On the contrary, if we wanted a real democratic country, we needed to be very successful in democratic economic growth, but also a better distribution of all the incomes and of the opportunities for everyone. And women has been shown always, but particularly, I would mention the last crisis, financial crisis. All the studies, not done by women, done by men, have shown that in all enterprises, companies, where they have more than 3 women on board, they have 53% more profitability than the ones that didn't have women. In all companies that have women CEOs, they had less risk during the crisis, greater performance, and they recover much quicker than in men. I'm not saying that women can be better than men. What I'm saying is that women can give a huge contribution, not only on the soft issues, but also on the economy, on the defense, as I mentioned, and in many other issues. And the figures are there. And it's not my imagination. There are serious scientific studies and approach. Third, women in the military. We also included women in the military in our country. And I have seen in many conflict and post-conflict countries how important has been the presence of women in the police forces or in the armed forces, because they really can be a very important part of the stabilization movement, but also they can use the guns when they need to use it. They can be a very important professional too. So I would tell you that it's very important the place of women in, and that has to have a reflection, a clear reflection on the Constitution, on the laws. One last think about this. And I know it is controversial, but I'm not coming here to just speak what maybe some people want to hear. I just want to share with you experiences. You need women, because they're part of the society, in the representation of the political life at all levels, local levels, regional levels, and also national levels. And one of the things that has been shown in the world, that women usually don't have the same possibilities as men. So you need to think on transitory, special measures to give women the place they deserve. You can call it in politics quota law. You don't like it, don't call it quota, call it gender balance. In our country, we sent a law that said gender balance law, not quota law, because there was no water in the swimming pool to jump on that nobody liked a quota law, but did accept a gender balance law. So there's many things that have to be done. So in terms of patience, I've been asked here about patience. I would say how could I say it? The art of politics. It's the art of maintaining principles of values, but define the best tools, the best strategies according to your principles and values on the priorities that you set. And try to build the biggest agreements and push all together towards those agreements. And I think that sometimes you have to be patient, but and many times you have to be very reasonable, but there are limits to the patience and to the reasonability. There are things that cannot be accepted, and in every country, in every culture, and according to the law, you'll define which are your limits. We have no limits to abuses. We have no limits. We didn't accept any limits to corruption. We didn't accept any limits to people who will not respect other people. And we will have no limits to people who really were damaging democracy. But it was, of course, through the law, through the judiciary system, that we work with those people who did not understand, because some people don't like democracy. Some people who have been in very privileged position don't want to change the situation. But on the other hand, with the example. And I finished my term, a 4-year term, with 85% of approval. And the constitution in Chile says you cannot be re-elected. You can only do 1 term. I mean, you can skip 1 term and then go again, but it's only 1 term. People on the street were telling me, change the constitution. You have the majority. Everybody likes you. We want you to continue. And I said, no. A democratic government, a democratic way of leading is not to change the laws and the constitution to be a suit for you. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا سيد الرئيس ميشيل باشليت. ربما لو تصرفك هذا اعتمده كثير من الرؤساء العرب لما وصلنا إلى هذه الندوة. If it's our case in the Arab world, there is no problem at all. شكرا جزيلا، وبإمكانك الآن أن تفضل بالمغادرة. شاكرين لك هذه المشاركة.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, I have to leave.
Thank you. شكرا جزيلا. الآن نواصل برنامجنا مع الدكتورة هبة حندوسة، أستاذة الاقتصاد في مصر هنا، ثم ننتقل إلى الأسئلة للسيد الرئيس الأندونيسي السابق، لأن هناك فعلا عدد كبير من الأسئلة ونريد أن نحترم الوقت. فهذه دعوة مبطنة للدكتورة هبة أن تختصر قليلا وأن تراعيني في هذا الجانب. وآسف مرة أخرى للتعطيل في الدور. تفضلي ستي.
Good morning, everyone. I will be focusing on the presentation by Dr. Habibie, and I will just comment on one of the items that the very rich presentation of Michel Bachelet included, and it was about the thousands of meetings that were made and thousands of opportunities for exchange. And I think in our country, Egypt, given that we have a very low a very low participation rate for a start, we need to give time and concern for the participation of the population, and especially youth and gender. I would like to group the comments I have into four. The first is that if we start from the demands of the revolution in Egypt, and I'm going to focus on what I understand to be some implications from Indonesia for Egypt. If we think of liberty and dignity and justice, democracy, in terms of liberty, we have seen already quite a few developments. We want to call them evolution rather than revolution, that's quite all right, especially in terms of collective action by workers. Okay, I'm an economist, so I'm going to give more focus to the economic implications of the revolution. In terms of social justice and dignity, I think that the institution of the minimum wage is very welcome. And it seems to me that when we talk about the marriage between business and the previous government, one of the sad results of the open door policy with little controls and balances on the regulatory side was the encouragement of enormous monopoly elements, but also no controls on providing decent jobs and decent pay. And I would venture to say that in Egypt, and with my former training as an industrial economist, unfortunately we are now suffering from very serious situations of exploitation in the private sector, formal and informal. So I think that the concept of justice and moving into what it really means for us is to take these measures that ensure that we have decent wages and decent conditions of work for men and especially for women, who constitute an important element in the manufacturing sector, for instance. Women are definitely an important group that is not being given enough attention when we think of the government and its and the composition of the cabinet, when we think of all the pronouncements from the ruling military committee. We haven't seen anything yet. What's in it for the women who are so important? On the other hand, when we say, how much can the youth deliver, given that they have triggered and initiated and kept the momentum of the democratization process, and they have been given perhaps enough room to maneuver so far, I think, as per our Egypt Human Development Report for 2010, we said that the agents of change for Egypt should be and will be youth. And sure enough, they are delivering. The social networks are not only new in Egypt in terms of their efficiency and competence and the fact that they are covering all of the issues on the political, social, and even economic fronts, but we can also say that youth have opened the vistas for participation at the level of NGOs. And this is again a sector, if we compare ourselves even to Morocco, and what we heard from Her Excellency Latifa, is that NGOs in Egypt, unlike Morocco and some other countries of the region, the civil society sector has been very much repressed in Egypt. And there's also a lot more room for women especially to contribute and for better representation at the level of local communities and at the level of different sectors where women excel, like education, like health, all of the care economy items. So if we're thinking of the future and how to accelerate and scale up the contribution of civil society, of women and of youth, we have two channels which have not so far been utilized, and we're well into how many months? At least 4-5 months now from the start of the revolution. One is decentralization. We haven't seen anything concrete in terms of steps to decentralize the country. We know that Egypt is one, if not the most centralized country in the world, and this is one of the demands of the youth, the demands of the revolution, that we should see a lot more of the political, administrative, and fiscal authority going down to governorates, to schools, to hospitals, to the community as the best source of monitoring and ensuring transparency. We also haven't seen a process of public discourse. We're talking about national dialogues. I'm involved in one of them. We see parts of them on television, but you cannot call this a real democratic discourse. There is not sufficient awareness. The media is not aware of the realities and the options so as to be able to have a debate. And I think the best example is what we had with our budget. For the several months since the start of the revolution, we've been talking about what are the options of Egypt's budget, which begins a new budget in June, and how do we show all of these messages of wanting better social conditions, better quality social services, more spent on the poor, less spent on the rich in terms of subsidies. There was no discourse, and I think this is very unfortunate, the fact that there is no awareness, and instead we're just focusing and being obsessed about the politics, the corruption, and how much are we getting back from those who stole Egyptian assets, how much of the Muslim Brotherhood is going to be influencing the future, instead of thinking really what is democracy about, and have to have voices from all participants, and how to engage in finding this tawafuq mujtama'i, or this national consensus on priorities and on the constitution. I think that's enough since Dr. Mohamed asked me to be short. Okay.
شكرا جزيلا سيدة هبة هندوسة، وآسف مرة أخرى لهذا الترتيب الذي أربكنا قليلا. هناك الحقيقة لأن يفترض أن تنتهي الجلسة بعد دقيقتين، سنفيض قليلا بما لا يتجاوز 10 دقائق في كل الأحوال. هناك مجموعة من الأسئلة للسيد الرئيس الأندونيسي الأسبق سيد حبيبي.